Nick Tyrone, neoliberal centrist dad. I just got a haircut, uh, actually at a Turkish barber. I use a Turkish barber, I have to say. And I use it because it's not very expensive and very good. So that's really it. So in terms of Turkish barbers, I can only say my experiences are good. Whether they are laundering money or not, I couldn't possibly tell you. Except to say that if they are still running the business very well because they do good haircuts and good beards. That's one of the big reasons I go there. They really know how to do beards. Anyway, that's by the by. I haven't made a video in a while. I'm really sorry about that. I just haven't really had much to say. Also, I've been taken up with a project of mine. I've been going to Aberdeen because I'm studying the energy sector up there, both oil and gas and renewables, and what's going on. Anyway, I don't want to ruin anything from that because I'm coming out with something on that in the new year, very early in the new year. I'll be having something about Aberdeen. I might do something here on it. But that's one of the things that's been taking up a lot of my time. But I felt I had to do something on what's going on at the moment with Keir Starmer, the run into the budget, which has been, I'm just going to be frank here, kind of a shit show. I mean, really pretty bad. Not just the build up to the budget, which would have been bad enough. Rachel Reeves' bizarre leader speech where she didn't really say anything at all. That was odd. But then we have the whole West Streeting debacle, where someone from Number 10, although Number 10 denies this, which is very odd because it's very obvious that it came from Number 10 because the journalists who cover this know that it came from Number 10 because obviously it would have come from Number 10 or they wouldn't have said that. So anyhow, wherever it came from, there was this rumor that West Streeting wanted to bring down Keir Starmer and he was going to try and set the starting gun for a leadership contest. Trying to think about why anyone at Number 10 would have wanted to do this. Well, I'm trying to think to the best of my ability, what could they have thought that they would have got out of this? I guess they would have thought it would have cut off at the knees West Streeting because it would have looked like West Streeting was holding the knife. But that just really doesn't make any sense unless Streeting is actually going to bring down Starmer. So that's very odd. Anyhow, really this is a roundabout way of saying I don't understand why Number 10 would have briefed this out. And I would question the sanity, never mind the ability of anyone who did that. Because the chances of it coming out well for Starmer were pretty... Well, they were just 0%. It was always going to make Starmer look bad. It was always going to put Starmer on the spotlight. It was always going to look like Starmer had lost control of the party. And also the idea... when you brief out that someone's trying to take down your guy, and your guy happens to be the Prime Minister, that can only make the Prime Minister look bad because the first thing it does is set up the idea that people are coming for him, which makes him look weak. Automatically. Always. Will always do that. Basic politics. So very, very odd that that's happened. But what that made me think is, interestingly, they must think West Streeting is the greatest threat to Starmer, or is the person that will replace Starmer. And I can imagine that probably comes from the fact that the people around Starmer probably are very close to Streeting. I'm guessing some of this, but some of this I have read in other places. I've heard from people. They're rumors, but fairly substantial rumors from reasonable sources that, the people around Starmer are pretty close to Streeting, at least some of them are, and that actually who they really want in Number 10 is West Streeting. There's this whole theory that goes... They sort of hand-picked Starmer because they felt he could win the membership over because he'd been part of the Corbyn project, and then he could then but they knew that they could kind of control Starmer, and that Starmer would then move heavily to the right after he'd won the leadership contest, which he did. He did move heavily to the right. I mean, considering how left-wing the platform he ran on was, that wouldn't have been hard, but no, he did move considerably to the right. And that the idea was that the Tories were in such a strong position with Johnson at the time, and Johnson was going to be Prime Minister for 10 years. Remember when everybody thought that? And then, but Starmer would do a lot better, right? He would get them back in the running. The 2024 election would be one in which the Tories would lose a whole bunch of seats to Starmer's Labour. He'd kind of be the Neil Kinnock of the era, right? He would rehabilitate the Labour Party and get it into a winning situation again, but then he'd step down and Wes Streeting would be the Blair figure. He would be the one who would actually bring Labour back to power. Didn't work out because the Tories completely fell apart and blew themselves to smithereens. Johnson turned out to be a terrible prime minister who self-destructed. Then you had Truss, and then you had Sunak, who just was, well, that was a whole thing we don't need to get into. Anyhow, and then they lost very terribly badly, and Starmer turned out to be the guy who led them to a victory with 400 seats. But the problem with this is I can believe that this exists in people's minds. In other words, I can believe that there are people in number 10 who have this plan and feel like they need to get rid of Starmer because he's totally screwing up, which he is, to get in Wes Streeting. The problem is they have to get past the membership, right? And, I mean, I don't know. I don't have my finger on the pulse of the Labour membership particularly, but I kind of think that there will be a consideration, a serious consideration for someone other than Streeting. That Streeting is basically... It will be continuation Starmer. It will be continuity Starmer. And I think the membership aren't in the mood for that. That's my general feeling. And I think that Ed Miliband can win for two reasons. And it really depends on how he plays it and the kind of... if there was a leadership contest and he threw his hat in the ring, what kind of strategy he would run for that leadership contest. And what I think that he would do, and if he did this, I think he would win. Okay? So one is play very heavily on nostalgia, right? I think there are a lot of people on the centre-left in Britain who have this feeling that, oh God, 2015, that was a real hinge moment. If only Ed Miliband had won that election and become Prime Minister, well, we never would have had Brexit. We never would have had Johnson. We wouldn't have screwed up COVID. We never would have had Liz Truss and all that, and the markets and everything wouldn't have gone haywire, and everything would be great if we just had if Ed Miliband had become Prime Minister in 2015. God, we'd be living, everything would be fine. I think there is that feeling on the centre left. I think it's complete nonsense. Let's just be clear. I'll play my cards on that one right now. No, I don't think it would have been better. I still think a lot of the problems would have just manifested themselves in different ways. And given that I think Ed Miliband is a fundamentally flawed person and fundamentally flawed politician, I think that they possibly could have manifested themselves in even worse ways than what we saw under the Johnson, Truss, May, iceberg. So I don't feel that way, but I think that I can imagine for a lot of Labour members, particularly slightly older members, that will be there. That will be in their heads. The second way, and this is a big one, is I can imagine Ed Miliband running on "Let's rejoin the EU." Now, this would play well to younger members. This will play well to left-leaning members, I would guess, of the Labour Party. And I also feel like it just goes perfectly in with the nostalgia thing, right? So it's this idea of, I should have been Prime Minister in 2015. I wasn't. That's why everything's gone wrong. You can elect me now to be Prime Minister, and I'll be Prime Minister immediately. And then what I can do is I can rejoin the EU, which will then correct everything and essentially almost erase the last 10 years. So that we just wipe it all out. And Trump and Brexit and all that it's like magically disappears. And we just we sort of morph into a world where Ed Miliband was Prime Minister and everything's wonderful. I can imagine that being a huge appeal to Labour members. More, I'm afraid, than Wes Streeting, who can be painted as continuity Starmer. Yeah? Part of the plan, right, if the plan was that Starmer was the Kinnock, then he had to play the Kinnock role, right, which was he never became Prime Minister, but he rehabilitated the party and got it to a place where it could win. If Kinnock had become the Prime Minister and had screwed up as badly as Starmer has over the last 18 months, then that whole character would be remembered differently. It would be a different thing, right? And someone trying to become leader in the wake of Kinnock would have had big problems having to overcome Kinnock's legacy as a bad prime minister, if that had been what had happened, right? It didn't happen. If Starmer had never been prime minister, and the whole point was, well, he's just a guy who saved the Labour Party and set it up on the plate for West Streeting / our Tony Blair. That makes Streeting's bid to become prime minister extraordinarily different than it would be now. Now it just looks like continuity Starmer. And I think if Starmer falls, which I think he will, at least before the general election, and probably a lot sooner than that, what will the members want? They'll want something different. Now, maybe they'll want Angela Rayner. I don't count her out. I mean, I know that she was heavily damaged, obviously, by the whole thing about her mortgage and all that. Could she come back? I'm starting to think that maybe she could, particularly if this drags on a bit and we don't have a leadership contest for the next year or so. People start to forget. People start to go, And then people, also, Labour members start to go, well, working class woman, maybe that is what we need. Also, she's very in touch with the left of the party, while not being anathema to the right. She isn't Rebecca Long Bailey or whatever. She isn't a Corbynista. So could she win? I actually think, but that's the thing, I think Rayner and Miliband have a much better shot than Streeting. That's my general feeling on this from the outside of the Labour Party. So maybe if I was really on the inside and I was talking to Labour members all the time and Labour MPs, maybe I'd have a totally different take on this. That isn't the position I'm in, so I don't know. But I have to say Miliband or Rayner, but I'd still say that Ed Miliband becomes Prime Minister. Now, if he did run on the we'll rejoin the EU, he'd obviously face a problem as soon as he became Prime Minister, because he couldn't rejoin the EU right away, and he wouldn't want to have a referendum right away. And the obvious thing that would have to happen is for him to say, well, look, I don't have a mandate from the people to do this, so he would then run the next general election, which would probably be sooner rather than later, depending on when he became leader. I mean, if he became leader sort of in the next, like before the May elections, then no. I mean, who knows when the next general election is, but he won't call it right away. That would be weird. He would wait for a polling boost or for some sort of recovery. But, he becomes leader in May 27, or the first half of 2027, or later than that, then I think that we're looking at, probably a relatively early general election, probably May 28 or something like that. So he runs on the idea of, look, if Labour wins a majority at the next general election, we will have a referendum to rejoin the EU as soon as possible. And that's what he'll run on. And that really sets up for, I think that does several things. I think if that happens, I think Labour get a boost in the polls, mostly because I think they then sort of that will really hurt both the Greens and the Lib Dems immediately, right? Because a lot of young people will go, well, actually, I quite like Miliband. He's quite left-leaning. Zach Polanski's all right, and okay, the Lib Dems, whatever. But Remainers will then see Ed Miliband as the ticket back, right? So Ed Miliband becomes that, and he really hoovers that up, and Labour are back to sort of, late 20s, maybe even early 30s in the polls. And it's very clear, it becomes clearer and clearer at this point that it's Labour reform, right? So you've got Labour and reform kind of neck and neck in the early 30s, let's say. And everybody else is like out to lunch, right? The Greens and the Lib Dems polling position crashes. The Tories don't improve. They're still in like the mid-teens. And it's clear it's just going to be Miliband, Farage. So I think what happens in the general election at that point, right, is I think to some extent Labour and Reform still do what they're kind of doing now, which is they sort of want to fix it up as it's between them, right? No one else matters. It's you're going to have a Labour government or you're going to have a Reform government. And they both want to push that message. Miliband wants to push himself as much as possible against Farage and really say, it's me or Farage. And Farage wants to say, well, it's me or Miliband. And that will work for both of them, right? And so I can imagine things like Miliband and Farage go to the BBC, ITV, and say, we will do a leaders' debate, but only if it's just Miliband and Farage. And they both say that. Both Labour and Reform say that. And I think in that instance, they would agree. I think the networks would agree. And everybody will cry stitch up and the Tories will go mad. But I think actually I can imagine them doing that. Because then they say, well, look, we won't participate in anything unless you do that. Unless it's Miliband Farage, we won't participate in any debates. And then what do BBC and ITV have at that point? They have debates between Kemi or whoever's leading the Tories at the time and Ed Davey and Zach Polanski or whatever. I mean, no one's going to watch that. And they'll know that. And actually, I mean, what you could end up with is they either accept an ultimatum from Miliband Farage to have the two of them debate, or if they say no, they'll just do it online. They can just do it somewhere else. They can just, some online platform, some YouTuber could host this. I mean, we are in that kind of age now, aren't we? Where they'll say, well, look, we'll do it somewhere else. And you know what? Millions of people will watch this. And no one's going to watch your Ed Davey, Kemi Badenoch pile of crap. Sorry. So that'll be interesting too. That's why I think actually BBC and ITV will agree, because they'll realize this. So it becomes all about Miliband Farage, the next general election, right? It's one or the other. And I have to say, I know a lot of people watching this will disagree. A lot of people maybe will get upset with me for saying this. I think Farage wins that. I think Farage wins that election. Mostly because I think Farage can, for the most part, rerun the 2016 EU referendum with caveats, which will be, well, this time I'll be in charge. That the problem after 2016, right, was you had all those Tory bozos running the whole thing, and they are all idiots. But this time it'll be me, and I will make Brexit come good. And I think that will actually work for a lot of people, particularly given he can run on the idea that, well, rejoining the EU means freedom of movement, means uncontrolled immigration. He can rerun some of the graphics from 2016, frankly. You know, the one with the Turkish, 77 million Turks and all that. He can rerun that, and you know what? It will work again. That will work in 2028 or 2029 as well as it did in 2016. Sorry to say, but I think that's actually true. So I think that just works for Farage, particularly given Miliband won't be an impressive prime minister because he's not impressive. He's not very good. And I actually would worry about Miliband winning the general election, being a fairly terrible prime minister, so we'll have that to contend with, and he loses the referendum. I genuinely, what do I think? Because if there's a referendum in the wake of Ed Miliband winning a general election, do I think pro-EU campaigners, who are all on the left now, really, pretty much, do I think they're going to go, you know what? I know Ed Miliband just won a majority, but let's think pragmatically here. We really need to figure out how we're going to win this, right? Because we need to learn the lessons of the past, and we need to have, we need to run a whole thing that really appeals to really a broad range of people in the country. We need to aim this at people in the Northeast who tend to be Eurosceptic, but we need to get as many of them as we can. We need to get as many sort of Tory, even Reform voters to vote for us as possible, because we need a centre-right. There's a contingent of centre-right voters who are going to decide this, who are basically going to be the swing voters, right? We can get the young people out, we can get this, but we need to just get out of this progressive majority crap mentality, and we absolutely need... Do I think they're going to do that? No, of course they're not. They're going to be high on the idea that Ed Miliband won. They're going to think this is going to be a cakewalk. We'll cakewalk this. This will be a rubber stamp exercise, this referendum. And then we have a rerun of 2016, which is basically a terrible rejoin campaign faces a really well-run, brilliantly done, hits all its marks stay out campaign, and the stay out campaign wins. Probably, perversely, again, 52-48. And I know this all sounds probably very negative to a lot of you, but this is genuinely how I think it's going to go. Anyway, on that cheery note, I will end it here. I want to keep this under 20 minutes. Nick Tyrone, Neoliberal Centre. If you enjoyed any of this, or you at least found it interesting, even if you disagreed with it, please subscribe to the channel. All this always helps me a great deal. And I'll be back as soon as I have something I actually want to talk about for 20 minutes. And I don't know how long that's going to be. Could be tomorrow, could be 2 weeks, another fortnight. So, until then, ta-ra.